Isaac Newton was born so small he wasn't expected to live through the day. His dad was already dead, and by the time he was 3, his own mother would leave him. He grew into a deeply insecure and solitary man, known for his fits of rage and crushing bouts of depression. And yet, when he died, he was buried like a king in Westminster Abbey, the first scientist ever to receive such an honor. This is the story of how Isaac Newton, a boy the world left behind, gave the world a new universe. On Christmas Day in 1642, Isaac Newton came into the world in a small stone farmhouse in Woolsthorpe, England. He arrived 3 months after his father, also named Isaac, had died. He was so premature and tiny that his survival was seen as a miracle. But any sense of stability in his young life was shattered just 3 years later. His mother, Hannah, remarried a wealthy minister and moved to a nearby village, but her new husband didn't want a stepson. So, little Isaac was left behind with his grandmother. For the next 9 years, Isaac was separated from his mother. This abandonment is thought to have scarred him for life, shaping a personality that was intensely private, untrusting, and pathologically secretive. It was a wound that festered. Years later, as a teenager, he compiled a list of all his sins, and among them was this chilling entry, threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. His mother's plan for him was simple: he would be a farmer and manage the family land. After some time at a local grammar school, she pulled him out and brought him home. But it was obvious right away that Isaac was not cut out for farming. He reportedly hated it. His head wasn't in the fields, it was in the books he constantly read and the complex mechanical models he loved to build. Luckily, his old headmaster and his uncle saw something special in the quiet boy. They managed to convince his mother to let him go back to school to prepare for university. In 1661, Isaac Newton left the farm for what he thought was for good, and walked into Trinity College, Cambridge, a place that could finally feed his hungry mind. At Cambridge, Newton was older than most students and started out working as a servant to pay his way, at least until he got a scholarship. He was supposed to be studying the classics, like Aristotle. But Newton was bored and restless. He quickly became obsessed with the new, radical thinkers of the scientific revolution, men like René Descartes. He tore through their work, filling a notebook he called Certain Philosophical Questions, with his own ideas. This is where he found his purpose. He wasn't just a student anymore, he was an explorer. He dove into mathematics, and in just over a year, he had mastered everything there was to know and was already pushing into brand new territory. He developed the binomial theorem and started piecing together a revolutionary new way of doing math, a language that could describe motion and change. His genius was so undeniable that his professor, Isaac Barrow, actually resigned from his own prestigious position as the Lucasian professor of mathematics so that Newton, at just 26 years old, could take his place. This wasn't just a promotion, it was the world acknowledging that a truly unique mind had arrived. Just as Newton was hitting his stride, the world came to a screeching halt. In 1665, the Great Plague swept across England. Cambridge University shut its doors, and Newton had to go back to the one place he'd tried so hard to escape, the isolated farmhouse at Woolsthorpe. For the next 2 years, he was cut off from the academic world, thrown back into the same solitude that had defined his childhood. But for Newton, this forced isolation wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. With no curriculum, no professors, and no distractions, his mind was completely unleashed. What happened next is maybe the single most productive streak of intellectual discovery in human history, a period now known as his Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Wonders. In the quiet of that farmhouse, the 23-year-old Newton laid the foundations for everything that would make him a legend. He perfected his new mathematics, which he called the science of flux ions, what we now call calculus. He launched his groundbreaking experiments into light and color. And, as the story goes, he saw an apple fall from a tree in his garden. Now, the apple probably didn't hit him on the head, but it did spark a revolutionary question: if gravity pulls an apple from a tree, could that same force reach all the way to the moon and beyond, keeping the planets in orbit? It was in this intense, lonely period that Newton truly crossed the threshold, starting his quest to decode the universe itself. For the next 20 years, Newton was basically a hermit. He was deeply introverted, insecure, quick to anger, and terrified of anyone stealing or criticizing his work. He had at least 2 nervous breakdowns in his life, likely caused by overwork, sleep deprivation, and maybe even mercury poisoning from the secret alchemy experiments he was obsessed with. Some historians even suggest his wild swings between manic creativity and severe depression could have been signs of bipolar disorder. His ordeal was really a war on 3 fronts. First, there was the puzzle of light. Everyone thought white light was pure. Newton proved them wrong. In a dark room, he passed a single beam of sunlight through a glass prism, creating a brilliant spectrum of color. But then he did something revolutionary. He used a second prism to gather those scattered colors back together, proving that white light isn't pure at all, it's a combination of every color. This discovery became the foundation for the entire field of modern optics. Second, he had to perfect calculus. To describe a universe in motion, a falling apple, an orbiting planet, he needed a math that could handle change itself. He kept this powerful tool a secret for years, honing it to unlock the physics of the cosmos. Finally, there was the massive challenge of gravity. The idea that one universal force could govern everything from a falling apple to the planets was mind-blowing. To prove it, Newton had to show it followed a precise mathematical rule, the inverse square law. This law states that the force of gravity weakens in proportion to the square of the distance between 2 objects. The math needed to prove this for the entire solar system was absolutely immense. It was an intellectual battle of the highest order. Then, in 1684, Newton got a visitor, the astronomer Edmund Halley. Halley and his friends were completely stuck on the problem of planetary orbits. He asked Newton what path a planet would take if it was pulled toward the sun by an inverse square law force. Newton casually answered that he'd already figured that out years ago, an ellipse. Halley was floored and begged him to show him the math. That visit was the push Newton needed. With Halley's encouragement, Newton spent the next 2.5 years in a frenzy of work, turning his old notes into a world-changing masterpiece. The result, published in 1687, was the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. The Principia is arguably the most important scientific book ever written. In it, Newton laid out his 3 laws of motion, inertia, F equals ma, and action-reaction. And he finally unveiled his universal law of gravitation, tying together the heavens and the earth in one beautiful system. The book explained the tides, the paths of comets, and even the wobble of the earth on its axis. It was a complete, coherent, and mathematically proven system for how the universe worked. The reward for decades of lonely obsession was, it seemed, the universe itself. Newton's story shows how a single, determined mind can completely change how we see everything. So many brilliant people in history were fueled by their personal struggles. Who do you think we should talk about next? Let us know in the comments. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the minds of geniuses, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next one. The Principia turned Newton from a recluse into the most famous scientist in Europe. His work didn't just give people answers, it gave them a new way to do science, based on hard math and real evidence. The elixir he brought back to the world was basically the scientific method in its most powerful form. He finally left the quiet halls of Cambridge for a public life in London. He was elected a member of Parliament for the university. In 1696, he was made Warden of the Royal Mint, a job he took incredibly seriously, hunting down counterfeiters with the same fierce focus he once applied to physics. In 1703, he became the President of the Royal Society, a position he held until his death, ruling over the scientific world with an iron fist. And in 1705, Queen knighted him, making him Sir Isaac Newton, not for his science, but for his public service. The boy who was left by his mother, who failed at being a farmer, and who spent decades in furious isolation had completely redefined humanity's place in the universe. His laws of motion and gravity were the foundation of physics for over 200 years, and they held up until another lonely genius, Albert Einstein, came along. Newton's work launched the Industrial Revolution, paved the way for space travel, and still explains how nearly everything moves in our daily lives. He died in his sleep in 1727 and was buried in Westminster Abbey, given honors that were once only for kings. It was an incredible end to his journey. Isaac Newton was a difficult, tormented, and deeply insecure man. But that obsessive, solitary nature was exactly what allowed him to see the world with a clarity no one had ever had before. He famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." But the truth is, this lonely genius taught the world to see, revealing a clockwork universe governed by laws that the human mind could finally understand.